These are the 12.4 notes for trig. We're going to talk about adding vectors in magnitude and direction form. So we've been adding them in component form, which has been very easy. But adding them in magnitude and direction form is a little bit different. At the top, you have all the formulas that we'll need for this, as well as your quadrant chart. And then I've broken each problem up into 3 different steps. So for example, number 1, it says find u plus v in magnitude and direction form. And then they give you the 2 vectors that they want you to work with. So the first thing we need to do is convert it to component form. Then the second step, we add them together in that form. And then sadly at the end, we have to convert them back. So 3 steps here. Step 1, let's take each one of these and convert it. So when we convert it, you're going to take the 4 cosine 175 as well as 4 sine 175. So almost like you're taking this 4 and distributing it. Now 175 is not on our unit circle, so we're going to have to rely on our calculator. In your calculator, please make sure that you are in degree mode. So go to mode. And this is the same for the Taculator or if you're using your Chromebook for your calculator. You can clear out of that. All right, so we're just going to type in 4 cosine 175. And then I'm going to go ahead and do 4 sine of 175, just so I have both answers on the same screen. Now this is important. We have to make sure that we round every answer to the 4th decimal place. In order to do that, you look at the 5th decimal place and decide whether the 4th stays where it is or rounds up to the next number. So remember, 5 and higher would round up, 4 and lower would just keep the value the same. So as you round these correctly, let's bring it over to the paper, you end up getting negative 3.9848 and 0.3486. Again, being very careful with that rounding here. Okay, let's do the same thing for the v. I'm going to do 5 cosine of 65, comma, 5 sine of 65. And then we can type each of those into our calculator. Still in degree mode. Five cosine 65, 5 sine 65. And then we're just going to round really carefully. So notice this top one, 2.11309. The 9 is going to bump that 0 up to a 1. So we have 2.1131. And then 4.5315 because the next 3 is small enough that it doesn't round up. All right, let's jot that down. 2.1131, comma, 4.5315. All right, so step 1 is done. We've converted u and v into component form. Step 2 is we're going to add the u plus the v. And in order to do that, we're just going to add the first number and the first number. And then we're going to add the second number with the second number, just like we used to. I'll do that in my calculator. Negative 3.9848 plus 2.1131. Negative 1.8717. I'll add the other 2 as well. 0.3486 plus 4.5315. All right. And 4.8801. Let's write those down. So I get an answer of negative 1.8717 and 4.8801. So now I've successfully added them in component form. That's a good answer, but they want the answer back to the original format. So I have to convert these back. In order to do that, we're going to have to use the two formulas at the top here, this one and this one. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and find the magnitude first. I'm going to do that by doing the square root. Nothing's different about this. It's just that you have a lot more decimals than we're used to having. Normally, we have whole numbers here. So it's a squared plus b squared, and all of it gets square rooted. We can actually plug all of that into the calculator at once. So the square root, most people will have to hit the shift or the second button, and then very carefully type everything in. Delta Math is incredibly picky about the answers. And so if you're off by just the tiniest bit, they're going to count it wrong. So this is just a good lesson in being really careful, rounding correctly, paying attention to the details. All right, once we get to the very end of this problem for the magnitude, we can actually round it to one decimal place. So I'm going to round this to 5.2. And notice it says it right here, magnitude rounded to the nearest tenth. So 5.2, we just want one decimal on that one. Now we still need to find the direction, and notice here it says direction to the nearest degree, so they want that as a whole number. In order to get the direction, we're going to type it into our calculator using the inverse tangent button. The A goes at the top, and the B goes at the bottom. All right, let me make sure you saw that. And that's how it's going to go into the calculator. So inverse tangent, you have to hit the shift or the second. So make sure it says tangent -1. And then very carefully, type everything in, divided by negative. And then we'll round this to the nearest whole number. So let's call that -69 degrees. Now at the very end, we have one more step. We have to check the chart. Let's make a little note about that so we don't forget. Check the chart. So the chart, remember, is going to have us adjust the calculator answers. The calculator is limited on its knowledge of what we're actually doing. So it can only give us the best answers it knows. We'll have to take into account where the vector is. So let's take a look at the vector, and we're going to look at this one right here in the middle in step 2. This vector, if you graphed it, it's a negative on the x right here, and then a positive on the y, right? So negative x would go to the left, and positive y would go up. So this vector is something like that, which means it's in quadrant 2. And if we notice in quadrant 2, it says add 180 degrees to the answer from the calculator. So we'll add 180 degrees to our answer and get a final answer of 111 degrees. Now, Delta Math kind of has some spaces provided for you to fill in the blanks. So it looks like this in Delta Math. There's a blank right here, and then you've got a vector, and then it says cosine of blank, sine of blank. It looks just like this. So you would type in the 5.2 right there, 111 right there, and 111 right there. All right, so for example number 2, I would ask that you pause the video and actually try this problem all the way out. That's what we did in class to make sure that everybody was getting the exact numbers. So pause the video, and then when you're ready and you're done, turn it back on, or maybe turn it on for each step. And make sure you know how to understand how to type these into the calculator. All right, hopefully you got a chance to try that. So you should have converted the first u to 0.3473. and negative 1.9696. You should have converted V into 6.3442 and 2.9583. So at this point, if you do not have these two exact vectors, I would invite you to look back at your calculator screen and see what happened. Maybe you rounded incorrectly. Maybe you forgot to type the number in front or used wrong cosine or sine. But try to figure out what you did wrong and see if you can come up to these correct answers. Then pause the video again and go ahead and try step number 2 once you've gotten step number 1. For step number 2, when you add them, you should get 6.6915 and 0.9887. Again, if you did not come to that answer, pause the video, look back at your calculator, check your work. When it's time to convert, we end up with a magnitude like this. And we should get an answer of 6.8, rounded to the nearest one decimal, remember? And then for the direction, we do the B over the A. Type that in, round it to 8 degrees. Then we check the chart. Got to check which quadrant we're in here. So a positive X would move me forward, and a positive Y would move me up. So my vector looks like it's probably right here. That would be in quadrant 1. And the chart for quadrant 1 says I can leave my answer just as it is. So in delta, you would write 6.8 in that first box. Then you'd have cosine. You have another box there to write your 8. And sine with another box to write your 8.